From the New York Times, this is The New Washington. I'm Michael Barbaro. Today, Charlie Spearing.
I think what upsets a lot of our readers is when you hear the media being so willing to take a completely hostile tone towards the president. I think a lot of our readers see that as sort of coming from one side. This is why our readers are so comfortable with the president describing the media as the opposition party. They're getting most of their talking points, a good portion of their sources from their Democratic friends. They didn't vote for the president. They don't know too many of the president's supporters. And I think that, I think there is a difference in tone coming from the mainstream media versus Breitbart. Some of the veterans have said that, if you have the right connections, you can even sort of get down to the old pool underneath. And it's interesting that, this is a press pool, but underneath this room is still an old pool that's down there. And
right.
You can go write your name on the walls. Or do
Michael Grimbaum, who did you talk to? Who is this we're hearing?
I talked to Charlie Spearing.
I am a White House correspondent for Breitbart News.
Breitbart News.
The Breitbart News.
The Breitbart News. So the kind of beacon of alt-right conservatism, Steve Bannon, anti-establishmentism, Trumpism.
Absolutely. You attend the briefing almost every day. Have you been called on more often under the Trump administration than the Obama press secretaries?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I worked during the Obama administration, I maybe got one question a month, maybe. And the first time Josh Earnest called on me, I was quite befuddled and had no idea he was calling on me.
Thanks. I'll get in the back. I'll give you the last one. Yes, you. What's your name?
Charlie.
Charlie?
Yeah.
Who are you with, Charlie?
Breitbart News.
Okay.
The recent story on the U.S. CIS preparing for a surge of government IDs. Do you have a response to that?
I don't. I'd refer you to USCIS on that. I don't have any information about that. Okay.
And so,
Do you think it was an accident, or did he do it on purpose?
He didn't know. I don't think he knew I was working for Breitbart at the time, but he recognized my face as having been there in the back rows for many, many weeks, and I think he just took a risk, and I respected him for doing that. And he continued to call on me afterwards because he felt that I was able to at least conduct myself professionally. And he, to his credit, he thought it was important to hear from all reporters in the room.
So Breitbart has a White House reporter. That may be news to some people.
Yeah, I think a lot of people perceive Breitbart as a venue for bomb-throwing columnists and outrageous opinions. But they actually have a news-gathering staff. Mm-hmm. And they've expanded it in recent years. They have reporters in London, Jerusalem, Rome. It started during the Obama years, but their influence as a news outlet has really started to matter now. And their prominence grew along with Trump during the campaign. What do you think the perception of Breitbart is today?
It's certainly one that is more combative than before because, a lot of effort was made by the opposing candidate to brand us as a white nationalist site.
Breitbart embraces ideas on the extremist fringe of the conservative right. This is not conservatism as we have known it. This is not republicanism as we have known it. These are racist ideas, race-baiting ideas, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-women, all key tenets making up the emerging racist ideology known as the alt-right.
You've worked there for several years. Have you heard any discussions or encountered anything that to you resembled a white nationalist philosophy or approach to coverage?
No. We've been under a lot of fire since Bannon left to join the campaign and eventually the administration. When the administration started, that's when the renewed attacks of alt-right, why is Bannon the white supremacist in the White House? I certainly never heard anything from Bannon, white supremacist. He can be a hard-charging, foul-mouthed sailor, but he's certainly not, any sort of, I've never heard anything like the stuff that they described, and I found that sort of absurd.
Michael, I've interviewed Steve Bannon and Alex Marlow, who is the editor-in-chief of Breitbart News. And when you raise the idea that they represent a white nationalist website, they vociferously oppose that. The explanation I've gotten from Bannon and Marlow is that Breitbart is a site representing nationalism, which they see as a populist streak of conservatism that is opposed to globalization, that is opposed to what they say is an internationalist view of the world. And in remarks that are very similar to those we hear often from the president, they feel that loyalty to America, to American workers, to American production should be held above all other values in our politics. Now, does that coincide with some of the words we hear from white nationalists? Sure. Does it coincide with some of the euphemisms the white nationalists use to talk about race superiority? Americans above foreigners? Yes. But Marlowe and Bannon have long maintained that to compare Breitbart with a Nazi website or a site like the Daily Stormer that is explicitly about white supremacism is a false notion.
When most people there are really just straight down the line conservatives who have sort of the same view of politics as, the people I grew up with in Wyoming and many of the reporters I work with in Washington, D.C.
Where'd you grow up? Where are you from? And how'd you make your way to D.C.?
Yeah, that's interesting. I was born on a farm in Wyoming and was raised there. I grew up listening to sort of talk radio and NPR newscasts in the tractor. And, it's a very conservative, sort of libertarian atmosphere. There's no love for the federal government. When you're out west, the federal government is sort of representative as trying to restrict your freedom. So, yeah, there's definitely a skepticism of the federal government and a staunch, independent conservative mentality from everyone involved.
Did you always want to be a reporter? Was journalism something you were interested in?
So I always enjoyed traveling and writing and taking pictures. Growing up, I always loved it. You live on a farm, and anytime you have a chance to, see new things is always awesome. It just really makes an impression on you. Like family trips, we would go out to, Oregon to visit extended family, and driving through massive cities in Portland were just incredible. Likewise, when I went to sort of Tijuana, I did a mission trip in college, and that also made a huge impact on me. And then I wrote a very sort of extensive, I don't know if you'd call it like a journal, but just an account of all the things I experienced there. Huh. And that also, in college, that really was an enjoyable experience. So going forward, I was really looking into journalism as a possible career. After a stint working as a reporter for Robert Novak, the Washington Post columnist.
Robert Novak, it's certainly a happy occasion to have you back at your alma mater.
The famed conservative journalist and columnist.
I'm not. I think anybody who deals with politics and ends up with no opinions and ideas is a neuter. But still, what gets me excited is when I really find out something that other people don't know. And that's why... even though I'm a columnist, I still think of myself as a reporter.
He passed away in sort of August of the 2008. So election's in full swing.
Yep.
Not many people are hiring at this point. But I found a niche job working part-time for a website called politicshome.com, which was a UK outfit.
Okay.
So I worked there part-time, and then after the inauguration, I worked for the Washington Examiner. It was a new position, a social community manager.
Oh.
And so that's how I got into Twitter, Facebook, social media, and sort of the appetite that the internet has for this kind of content.
So did you go from the Examiner to Breitbart?
Yes. After 5 years at the Examiner, then I was recruited by Breitbart to sort of bring everything, my sort of collection of skills over to their team. Yeah, these stairs lead down to the basement.
What are these pens here? There's a bunch of framed pens and
let's see. President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the foundation of the Great Society.
Charlie Spearman showed you around this White House press briefing room, which is known as the Brady Room, and also took you into the basement.
You basically go down a set of pretty shadowy stairs, and you end up in this small, not very clean basement. This is not glamorous, by the way. There's a soiled carpet and sheets of paper taped up on the walls. And there are a lot of small outlets down there, the Washington Examiner, the Daily Mail from England.
Hey, guys.
Their reporters basically squat in seats that are free throughout the day. And that's where Spearing files a lot of his stories. Usually grab a desk down here just to get some space for yourself. I mean, he basically listens to the briefing, follows the news, and then he'll retreat down there with his laptop to file off an update.
Yeah, you'll see up in the corner there'll be like business cards of people who have been assigned this desk.
Right.
You know, it's not even a desk. It's like just a space on a table with a chair.
And an outlet like Breitbart, they don't even have a permanent desk.
But you get like phone connection, internet connection. Certainly if I'm at the White House, this is a good space to publish a story that's like breaking and yeah, as you can see, not all the desks are full. They will be closer to the press briefing. They're usually pretty full.
Right.
So you have a lot of digital outlets in the basement here. And you also have the two big network booths, CNN, Fox News. And you can see like Fox here and CNN's Day in America going in his booth. So yeah, a lot of cross-pollination between different outlets. This is where a lot of the audio...
Michael, tell me about Charlie Spearing. What kind of stories does he write? How often is he publishing?
Spearing writes several times a day, really. He's kind of the news engine for Breitbart's White House coverage. I think readers would find his coverage much more straightforward than they might expect when they hear the name Breitbart. Spearing is not someone who writes provocative opinion pieces. I mean, what would you say is like a great... What would a great Breitbart story be? What would be a story that you would... or if you want to point to one of your own, or just something that you think kind of represents what the site aspires to do?
Yeah, this morning I published a story about the Senate Republicans responding to Bob Corker's comments, which, obviously made a lot of buzz over the weekend.
On the day that I spent time with Spearing, Bob Corker's remarks about Trump were the talk of Washington.
This is a New York Times interview done with our colleague, Jonathan Martin.
Your colleague, Jonathan Martin, interviewed Corker himself and got a lot of interesting and on-the-record comments.
Corker warned that Trump's behavior, which he thought was erratic, could potentially lead to World War III.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't realize that, that we could be heading towards World War III with the kind of comments that he's making. And
which was remarkable to hear from a sitting Republican senator.
And the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
So Spearing, rather than simply just summarizing our interview with Bob Corker, called up other Republican senators, trying to find out, was this an opinion that was widely shared in the Republican caucus?
I spoke to several staffers and even got a Republican Senator Barrasso from Wyoming, actually, on the record, sort of distancing himself from Corker's comments and supporting Trump's instead. And yeah, I mean, some of the comments I got were pretty cool. They were... sort of expressing their frustration with Corker and his leadership as the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee.
Were you sort of setting out to demonstrate that not every Republican in the Senate agreed with Corker's view?
Right. Corker made a statement that really struck me in the Jonathan Martin interview, which was, I'm speaking for the majority of my Republican colleagues, except for maybe a few. And that really sort of inspired me to go, like, who are the few that really don't appreciate Bob Corker right now? And who are the majority of his Republican colleagues that are actually, like, pushing and supportive of it?
What struck me about that story is, here's a legitimate journalistic question. Is Bob Corker speaking for other members of his caucus? That's something that Washington would want to know.
But it's not an angle you'd expect a traditional mainstream news organization to pursue.
And if the answer...
Which doesn't mean it shouldn't be.
Correct. No, absolutely. And if the answer is that Corker is isolated and that other Republicans are still sticking with Trump, that might be something that an audience that's sympathetic to the president wants to hear.
Right, and this really comes down to our audience, right? My basis for reporting is that my readers aren't going to see Senator Corker as this veteran GOP establishment figure that should be taken seriously. They've probably never even heard of Bob Corker. He's out there criticizing the president and saying some pretty inflammatory things. So that story is already told by you guys and by Jonathan Martin. Very, very cool interview. I want to tell the story from our readers' perspective. Like, who are the people who didn't like what Corker had to say, and what are they actually thinking behind the scenes? Like, giving them a voice for the readers who want to hear that.
We'll be right back. So, Michael, that's Charlie Spearing's explanation for how he does his journalism and how he handles the White House beat at Breitbart. I want to talk a little bit about the broader news organization of Breitbart and some of the headlines that they have written, some of the stories they've covered, and how they do it. And I want to start by reading a paragraph from a story that, oddly enough, you and I wrote together during the presidential campaign about the elevation of Steve Bannon into the presidential campaign. And this is how we summarized some of Breitbart's more provocative journalism. They accused President Obama of, quote, importing more hating Muslims. Breitbart compared Planned Parenthood's work to the Holocaust. They called Bill Kristol, who is a conservative commentator and happens to be Jewish, a renegade Jew. And they advised female victims of online harassment to, quote, just log off the internet because they were, quote, screwing up the internet for men. So how does someone like Charlie Spearing fit into an organization that writes stories and headlines like this?
He brings up a divide that you hear a lot about actually in the mainstream press, which is news and opinion.
He sees himself as news.
He sees himself as a reporter, someone who's out there collecting facts for the readers. He sees that as separate from the opinion side, which is where you get notorious figures like Milo Yiannopoulos, self-styled provocateurs who like to provoke liberals and say outrageous things.
Yeah, when I joined Breitbart, they agreed with me that I would write straight news. That was always what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. We're really encouraged to sort of build our own brand there that's, independent as we want. And I think certainly the editorial staff started making a bigger separation between news and opinion. We certainly had some fun Milo headlines that were just headlines. And they were clearly opinion headlines, but they were presented as news stories.
Michael, these are some headlines that ran above stories that Milo Yiannopoulos wrote for Breitbart. Male students do not go to consent classes, a reference to treatment of women. Muslim gang rapists are springing up everywhere. Why can't we be honest about it? Another headline, Milo, Muslims will bring, quote, lamb chops, yogurt, and gang rape to America. It's a Breitbart headline from 2014.
I think since then we've done a better job of when a writer is sharing an opinion, we'll put his last name in the headline. So it's like not just, a controversial headline without somebody's name who's actually writing the headline. So I think that has been a good step by the editorial staff. And there's really not much room for opinion at Breitbart in spite of all of our sensational headlines. We have lots of fun sensational headlines, but I think when you read the actual stories, they're pretty basic.
I mean, I just want to be blunt. I mean, some of those headlines were seen as racist. Some were seen as sexist, misogynist. Do you feel that Breitbart is a racist organization?
No, certainly Milo had his shock jock type of reporting, and I usually sort of experience that as when you're working for any organization, you're not going to 100% agree with everything that they say. But when you're working for an outlet like Breitbart, you're going to have a little more, there's going to be more opportunities for you to sort of disagree with content, but the freedom that it offers is the same freedom that you're given to pursue your own work. And so even though like some of the Milo headlines were not some headlines that I would write. I mean, if I tried to write like Milo, it would come off as really inauthentic.
Does he see it the way a Times reporter, and this might be a stretch for Times readers, see the news editorial divide? There's a columnist writing this, and then there's a reporter writing that, and we're not going to really be interacting, and I have no control over what they do, and they have no control over what I do. Is that his position?
So we have what we call the firewall between editorial and news. And, you and I are not necessarily condoning the views that are on our op-ed page. I think there are a lot of journalists out there who would refuse to work at an organization like Breitbart.
We should point out that Milo was just recorded in a video on stage. America. In front of a group of people, including a white supremacist named Richard Spencer, who saluted in the form of a Nazi.
We also discovered that Milo used Nazi terminology with his internet passwords and other parts of his online persona. I also want to note that Breitbart severed its relationship with Milo a few months ago, which at the time was seen as one of these growing pains issues of a news organization that was kind of coming into maturity. There was audio discovered of Milo essentially condoning pedophilic relationships, and Breitbart said that it would no longer have a relationship with him. He's no longer affiliated with Breitbart.
Right.
When you told colleagues or friends that you were going to work there, did anybody express hesitation? I'm trying to bring the conversation back 3 years ago. I think Breitbart in kind of the outside of Washington has taken on a whole new meaning since the 2016 election, but we're talking about a couple years before that. But I am curious, just whether, did anybody suggest that they thought it was an unusual move or something you might want to?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I told people, they were shocked. And the people I'd asked privately did not recommend that I do it. They saw, keep in mind, people in Washington pretty much hate Breitbart. It's universally loathed by Democrats and Republicans alike. So when I said I was doing this, yeah, I definitely had a political editor say I was throwing away my career. It was a big step for me, and it's certainly one that I didn't take lightly. I thought about it a long time. But it's when you're looking at conservative media today, Breitbart's one of the biggest remaining sites, and a lot of the other conservative outlets have sort of struggled in sort of the Trump era. The career path of someone who works in conservative media is very slow. A lot of reporters can either start out at the Daily Caller, the Washington Examiner, and usually just sit there and wait for the next opportunity. A lot of ex-Examiner people have moved on to Fox News, but only after, 5 to 7 years. And even some of those are still just contributors. They're not full employees of Fox News.
In a written announcement released moments ago, the president-elect said he has selected Republican National Committee Chairman Reince Priebus to be his chief of staff and his campaign CEO, Stephen Bannon, to be chief strategist and senior counselor to the president. Mr. Trump says,
Michael, it'd be a little strange if our editor was all of a sudden working at the institution that we get paid to cover.
Quite.
But that's exactly the situation Charlie Spearing found himself in last January. Steve Bannon, essentially his boss, is the chief strategist to the president of the United States. And it's Charlie's job to cover that White House. So, you're the senior White House correspondent. How awkward was it for you to cover a White House where Steve Bannon was chief strategist?
Yeah, it was interesting because everyone's like, oh, dude, Bannon, you're probably going to get all these scoops, right? But Bannon's very strategic in choosing his media. And I think he spent a lot of time talking to other news outlets because anytime you wrote a story, it'd be like, oh, Steve Bannon gave that story, to the White House. And very rarely the case, right? You would have sometimes you would exchange text messages with Bannon, but he was just as useless of a source as some of the other administration officials. They didn't really they were very strategic in crafting their media narrative, and Breitbart wasn't always a part of it. But, we got some interesting details about, certain events, and, he was definitely a source then. But, as far as breaking any big scoops launched personally by him, that was not necessarily the case.
While he was in the White House, people interpreted Breitbart's stories as part of his internal battles, right? That Breitbart was going after his rivals in the West Wing. Was that true?
Yeah, that's funny. The daily Twitter speculation, the Twitterati, screen capping our front page and like, "Whoa, this is very clearly personally dispatched by Steve Bannon." Yeah, it certainly wasn't the case, but we really enjoyed and had a lot of laughs at the screen capping going on, and it was sort of rewarding to us, showing us how influential we were becoming in the new Trump administration.
So my guess is that there's probably a view of Breitbart that we're talking about this Corker story that, I don't know, Steve Bannon calls you up in the morning and says, Charlie, we got to push back on this Corker thing, go write a story. There's some sort of directive coming from on high. I mean, how does that compare to the reality of how you do your work?
Yeah, it's really a unique situation at Breitbart where I've been given sort of the leniency to write whatever I want. And I get very little feedback from the powers that be. When I file a story, people are like, "Oh, epic! Like, very cool. Get this up," that kind of thing. But the conversation is there's very little how to say it, like senior editorial structure that comes down. The editors do have conference calls, and reporters have conference calls. But when it comes to calling the shots, I think reporters are given a lot of leeway to just pursue things as they want to. And I think I've certainly enjoyed that atmosphere at Breitbart.
I think Charlie's acknowledging the fact, which is widely known, is that Bannon is an extremely shrewd political operator. And he would know that just giving a story to Breitbart that was favorable to him might not necessarily get the outcome that Bannon would want, because people would read and say, this is planted by Bannon, this is all claptrap, we don't need to pay attention to this. So I think it's interesting that Bannon became kind of an occasional source. Probably my guess is the way he is with other reporters in the White House. And in that sense, Charlie was just like his peers in the briefing room. You now have another White House correspondent. You're called on all the time at the briefings. I'm wondering, how do you sort of keep up, how do you remain anti-establishment when you are more accepted into the DC establishment, when you have an administration, when you have a White House that's more receptive to you, and you're not necessarily as much as an outside player as you were in past years?
It's the swamp, And, Bannon was only able to live in the swamp for so long before he left abruptly. And it's a story in Washington that's so unique. Like, even though the president is representing a lot of our values, he's running into an incredible amount of opposition with his agenda, which has surprised a lot of readers. They kind of thought that if he won the presidency, he would make all these things happen.
Everything would happen like that.
Yeah, pretty quickly. And certainly with the rush of executive orders, there's always that high at the beginning of an administration that things are happening. But yeah, at this point, it's never been more clear that there is this swamp in Washington, D.C., and the values that Trump espoused are coming under attack. And we can certainly have a lot of fun reporting on that. There's so many people in this town that do not want to see his agenda put into place. And so there's plenty of material.
Sounds like what Charlie Spearing is saying is that our side, our perspective has won the White House, but it's not actually winning the larger political, governmental war. That it actually may be losing it.
Their man is in charge of the executive branch, but they're still clinging to that outsider status because it's been so profitable for them. The fact that Trump's agenda is stalled in Congress, that he's facing opposition on repealing Obamacare and other major promises he made during the campaign, allows Breitbart to persist in that role as a belligerent, as the self-styled barbarians at the gate in Washington, D.C., which is a little strange since the chairman of the whole website was chief strategist to the president. He still feels like he's an outsider.
Sean.
Yeah.
Hi, Sean. Just a quick question. Any response to the calls for impeachment by Representative Maxine Waters?
No. I mean, I would just say, it is, the president is doing everything he can to move this country forward. And I think whether it's the Democrats in the Senate who are trying to stall these nominees or these little political stunts on the House side, the bottom line is, I think by and large, you see the support that the president's receiving for his policies
Thank you,
throughout the country.
Thanks for having me.
The New Washington is produced by Michael Simon Johnson and Michaela Bouchard. Brad Fisher is our engineer. Lisa Tobin is our executive producer. Samantha Hennig is our editorial director. Our theme music is by Jim Brunberg and Ben Landsberg of Wonderly. Special thanks this week to Christopher Worth. That's it for The New Washington. See you back here next weekend.